Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the direct route to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we plan for you to take and pass your PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we devote our time to the process of plan, risk, responses. This is the process of creating an actionable plan of options to address how each risk will be handled. The key benefit of this process is that the risks are handled based on their priority, with budgeted resources and activities included to accommodate them. So this lesson focuses on defining and discussing the plan, risk, responses process, defining the risk register, its content and its impact on the process, detailing the strategy options to handle negative and positive risks, and introducing and defining important risk-related concepts like triggers, residual risks and secondary risks. This lesson comes to you in two parts. In part one, we'll have the overview, the inputs, and the first couple of tools and techniques or so. And then in part two, we'll finish off the tools and techniques, we'll look at the outputs, we'll have a review, and we also have a couple of exam questions and a tip for you there at the end. As always, let us begin at the top. Project risk management includes the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, and controlling risk on a project. And the response planning part of the definition we just heard is going to be the focus of this lesson. But before we get to that, we first have to plan risk management. This is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. Next, we have to identify our risks. This is the process of determining which risks may affect the project and document their characteristics. Then we perform first the qualitative risk analysis. This is the prioritizing part of everything. We prioritize our risks for further analysis or action by assessing and combining their probability of occurrence and impact. At the end of this process, we know which ones of our risks are high impact, high priority risks, and those are the ones that we're going to focus on going forward, usually. And then the next process is perform quantitative risk analysis. So we take our high priority, high impact risk and we assign a number to them, usually a dollar number or some kind of monetary value. This is the process of numerically analyzing the effect of identified risks on overall project objectives. And now, finally, we get to the part where we plan risk responses. This is the process of developing options and actions to enhance opportunities and to reduce threats to project objectives. And from here we move on to our final process, controlling our risks. This is the process of implementing risk response plans, tracking identified risks, monitoring residual risks, identifying new risks, and evaluating risk process effectiveness throughout the project. We've already covered the first four processes in this knowledge area, and you probably remember that they are all falling into the planning process group. Now, it's no secret if I'm going to tell you that the process of plan, risk, responses, our focus here, is also part of the planning process group, simply because its name is plan, risk, responses. Yeah, it sometimes can be that easy. The main concept that you have to understand in the plan, risk, responses process is that this is the place where you plan what you will do about the risks you have identified and document your actions. In this process, you will come up with strategies on how to either avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept your negative risks, or how to exploit, enhance, share, or accept your positive risks. There are two thoughts I would like for you to keep in mind as you develop your risk responses. First, keep your responses appropriate. Each response should reflect the importance and significance of the risk. We are not looking for overkill, just a response that is adequate for a single risk. Then you have the added difficulty of selecting the importance of each project risk. If you have several options of risk responses, then choose the right one, or at least the one that seems right at the time. Second, do not forget that risks can be both positive and negative. You will want to minimize the negative risks and enhance the positive ones by employing the appropriate risk response strategies. And when you look at the ITTO overview here, the figure from the PMBOK guide, you're going to maybe scratch your head and go, what, only 2 inputs, 4 tools and techniques, and 2 outputs? Yeah, there is not much in terms of numbers, but there is a lot that you need to know about all of this for the PMP exam. So let's get going. But before I show you our usual input slide, there's something else I'd like to draw your attention to regarding the ITTOs of risk management. If you analyze the overview of the risk management processes that shows the ITTOs, you will notice a few things. First of all, the risk register is created in the Identify Risks process. As a matter of fact, it's the only output from that process. From then on, the risk register is an input to all of the subsequent processes. Also noticeable is that in all subsequent processes, updates to the risk register is an output. Similarly, the risk management plan serves as an input to all subsequent processes once it is created in our first process, which is plan risk management. However, it is not updated by the other processes. And with that out of the way, here are once again the 2 inputs that we have in our process here. They are, and you could have guessed this, the risk management plan and the risk register. So first of all, as a component of the project management plan, the risk management plan is a roadmap to the other risk management processes because it defines what level or threshold of risks will be considered tolerable for the project, how risks will be managed, who will be responsible for risk activities, the amount of time and costs that will be allotted to risk activities. It is the risk thresholds that aid in identifying those specific risks that require specific responses. And as always, the more interesting question, of course, is why do we need the risk management plan? The answer is that the risk management plan is used as an input to plan risk responses because it will remind us of important information that we worked on during plan risk management. For instance, you may have performed an analysis of your project and figured out that the probability of actually achieving your budget and schedule goals is X%. Now that you have all of your prioritized risks, you can review those and see if your analysis is still valid and respond accordingly. Also remember the risk thresholds that we mentioned just previously. These thresholds can be defined as low, medium and high for risks, and these are also contained within the risk management plan. And then our second input is the risk register, which, as I mentioned earlier, is created in the Identify Risks process. It provides us with a list of all the identified risks on the project as well, what the root causes are, a list of possible actions or reactions for these risks, what categories the risk falls into, who the risk owners are, and the rating or priority list of project risks, along with a multitude of other information regarding each of our risks. You can think of the risk register as a library of information regarding project risks, so it's not surprising that you would want this to be an input into planning responses to your known risks. And here is an overview of how the risk register is developed, not just in one process, but in multiple processes in the risk management knowledge area. During the plan risk management process, the risk register did not exist. The concern here was on creating a risk management plan for our project. Then in the next process, identify risks, we created the risk register and added our initial list of risks. In perform qualitative risk analysis, we prioritized our risks and provided the probability of a risk occurring by denoting them as high, medium, and low risks. In the perform quantitative risk analysis, we numerically analyzed the effect that our identified risks would have on the overall project objectives and added probabilities, priorities, and trends into the risk register. Now, in this process here, plan risk responses, we take the risk register and all the identified risks, and we will come up with the proper means of addressing our risks and adding that information into the risk register. The risk register therefore provides the information that we need to develop our risk response strategies. Of course, we will need to control our risks in the control risks process as well, and that is then discussed in that lesson. But so far, this is what we have done to the risk register in the risk management knowledge area and the 5 processes that have happened so far. There are 4 tools and techniques that help us with developing appropriate responses for our identified risks. We have the 4 strategies for negative risks or threats. We have 4 strategies for positive risks or opportunities. The contingency response strategies that are put into place only for the occurrence of certain events, and the appropriate knowledge base of expert judgment who specialize in creating the right risk response strategies. This is a robust list of tools and techniques, so let's jump deeper into each one and gain a better understanding of it, because, trust me, PMP exam sample questions that I have seen, there are quite a few that focus on how we manage our risks in regards to applying tools and techniques. But first, let me give you a few general thoughts here, because whether you define a strategy to handle a negative risk or a positive opportunity, you should ask yourself a few questions, and here are some suggestions for you. First of all, you should ask yourself, does the risk response oppose a stated or implied stakeholder requirement? So if we applied our response, would this go against what the stakeholders want? We definitely don't want that to happen. Second question, what is the level of effectiveness that we anticipate, and how long will it take for this effectiveness to actually take place? What is the cost? What is the schedule? And what are the quality implications of our risk response? Is the response commensurate with the importance of the risk, or are we just producing overkill here with our response? Is there a need for a primary or backup strategy, or a fallback plan, which is just another term for a contingency plan here? And finally, does the strategy by any chance leave a residual risk? There are always many risk response strategy options available to you whenever you deal with risks, whenever you plan for your risk responses. So think these questions through in your head before you make a choice and you decide which of the available risk responses is the one that you're going to document in your risk register. Negative risks or threats are just that. They have a negative impact on or threaten the project objectives. If they occur, there are 4 strategies that can be implemented to deal with them. They are avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept. There is a unique and different influence resulting from each use of these strategies. Therefore, selecting which strategy to implement should be based on the risk's probability and impact on the overall project objectives. One of the simplest responses to a risk is, of course, to avoid it. Think about it this way. If you are driving along and there is a hole in the road, well, you simply turn your steering wheel to drive around it. Or if you think the road has too many holes in it, you can decide to take another route. Risk avoidance is exactly the same on your project. You launch the project and the project team acts to eliminate the threat or protect the project from the impact of a risk. You may find that your project is simply too risky, so the company decides not to do the project at this time. You avoid all risks with this radical avoidance strategy. But what if the project has already started? How do you avoid a risk there? Well, once the project is launched, there are a number of ways that allow you to avoid your risks. And some of them are by changing the project scope, extending your project schedule, adding additional budget, clarifying the requirements, improving and increasing communication with stakeholders, bringing on experts, and so on. The number of possible responses to a risk is as large as the number of possible risks. If you are unable to avoid a risk, you may wish to transfer the risk to someone else. I mean, why take on a risk yourself if you can have someone else deal with it, right? Risk transference is a risk response strategy where the project team makes a third party responsible for the management of the risk. The idea is to shift the negative impact of the threat to a third party. However, very important, this does not eliminate the risk. The risk still exists. You are, in a sense, deflecting this risk because you deflect the impact of the risk from you to someone else. But the risk is still there. It could still happen, but it's not happening to you anymore. It's happening to somebody else. There is a diverse number of risk transference tools, but some of the most popular include contractual agreements, insurance, and warranties. In the majority of the time, risk transference involves payment of a risk premium to the third party that assumes responsibility for the risk. Take insurance, for instance. You purchase insurance to cover the shipment of your data center hardware and the risk of it being damaged or lost in transit. The insurance company assumes responsibility for the risk and will be held liable in the event of damage or loss. You can also transfer liability of a risk to another third party via a contractual agreement. For example, if you feel that there is too much risk involved in producing an item in-house, you can contract with a vendor and have that vendor do it for you. The type of contract used will determine whether the buyer or seller is responsible for all or part of the risk. Let's look at an example to illustrate what mitigating risks on your project involves. Let's say you have a construction project and you're concerned about the upcoming winter and all the possible snow that could impede the progress. To lessen this risk, you might choose to pursue the construction project next spring. This is an example of risk mitigation. In this type of strategy, actions are taken to reduce or lessen the chance of occurrence, or if the risk does occur, minimize the impact of the risk through early and proactive action. Some examples of mitigation strategies are that you may add additional time into your schedule, like changing the delivery date in order to avoid bad snowstorms that tend to occur in a particular month, or you may include redundancy in your system design plans to reduce the impact from a failure of a component. As with avoidance, there are countless of mitigation strategies. But in the end, there is no way that you will be able to eliminate all risks on your project with the strategies that we have seen so far. There are some risks that you'll have to make the decision to acknowledge and take no action unless the risk actually occurs during your project. The use of risk acceptance is taken on when it is not possible or not cost-effective to address a risk in any other way. There's a decision, therefore, by the project team not to make any changes to the project management plan in handling the risk, or they haven't identified any reasonable response strategy at this time. The acceptance strategy can either be passive or active. Passive acceptance means you document the risk, but you take no action. You do, however, continue to monitor the risk to make sure that it has not changed significantly. Active acceptance is when you prepare for the risk by establishing a contingency reserve, which could include time, money, or resources to handle the risk. So we now know that there are 4 risk strategies that you can employ in response to a threat. But it's also important to note that there is an inherent order in which you may want to apply them to your project risks. If you are faced with a risk, the first question to ask is, can we accept this risk? Yes, you accept it. You do nothing about it. If the answer is no, you then ask yourself, is there a way to avoid this risk? If the answer is yes, you will employ this avoidance strategy. If the answer is no, you move on and ask yourself, is there a way to mitigate this risk? Which is a fancy way of saying, is there a way that we can minimize the probability or impact that this risk has on our project? If yes, we begin this mitigation strategy. If the answer is no, you then ask yourself, well, can we transfer this risk to someone else, like buying insurance or having a subcontractor work on this portion of the project? If the answer is yes, well, let's do it. If the answer is no, start from the top. Maybe you have to accept it, or you may have to think harder. You may have to put the risk onto a watch list or simply ignore it. Well, not the best strategy there, but you can use ignoring it for minor risks. And with that, we have come to the end of part 1 of this lesson. Justine?
I'm off.
Until next time.